Back in early 1981, President Carter asked me to work for him to help him write his presidential memoirs. And he asked me to go down to Plains, Georgia to do this. Most presidents, modern presidents, had created teams or hired a ghostwriter to write their memoirs. But President Carter had decided that he was going to write his own memoirs. But he was convinced that he needed someone that had worked in historical materials to work with him. And I had worked for Dumas Malone at the University of Virginia on his multi-volume biography of Thomas Jefferson. So I did have some presidential experience. And he asked me to come down to Plains to help him. I actually thought I was going to be working in Atlanta, where most of the materials had been brought down. But he had made up his mind he wanted me in Plains. And I'm thankful that he did, because that is the way I developed a personal relationship with him, not just a business relationship. Plains, Georgia, had about 600 people, very small community. But within that community was President Carter's mother, Miss Lillian, Mrs. Carter's mother, cousins, brother, sister. It was his family home. And through the years, people always asked me, President Carter, isn't he going to move to Atlanta? How can he be in Plains? He's been the president of the United States, but it's his home. And he has stayed there. And he feels a part of it. Nevertheless, as I worked for him, and he was very intense on his work. That's one thing I learned right from the beginning. When President Carter wants to do something, he puts his full effort into it. And he only wanted to spend basically a year writing his memoirs. That sounds like a lot of time to most people, not doing a story.
Yeah.
To write the entire story of his presidency. But he had things he wanted to do. Yes, he wanted to stay, have his home in Plains. But he had been transformed into a global citizen, and he wanted to do other things. In particular, to start the Carter Center, which would give him an opportunity to work on all sorts of good things around the world.
Yeah.
And so we worked very hard that first year. Even that first year when he was in Plains, most of the time, he took a trip to China and Japan. He didn't stay all his time in Plains. But then once we had reached the point where the first draft of the book was done, he started traveling more and created the Carter Center, which was his dream. Conflict resolution was what he wanted to do most, but he also wanted to work on other issues. And so at the beginning, conflict resolution, particularly focusing on the Middle East and also on international security and arms control with the Soviet Union then, were two projects that he wanted to work on. But he also had a third project, which was healthcare. The Atlanta is the home of the Centers for Disease Control. And so we were able to get the director, Dr. William Faggy, who had been the director of the CDC and was stepping down. He came to run our first project and then later on became the director of the whole Carter Center, a remarkable man.
Yeah.
And President Carter chose excellent people to work for him with the Carter Center and to not only work on the Middle East and arms control, but on Latin America, on Africa, Asia, with guinea worm became our great project to eliminate, not just to eliminate, to eradicate a disease called guinea worm from the world. But we also took up other diseases as well. And our health programs work mostly in uh, in Africa, but they also do work in other parts of the world, in Asia and Latin America as well.
Yeah.
So it's been a remarkable experience working for it.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you have such a unique perspective because you have that personal relationship with the president that most people will never have. And so, beyond the president, Jimmy Carter, beyond the governor, Jimmy Carter, you kind of know the person. Can you give us a little glimpse into who he is just as a person, a simpler guy living in Plains, Georgia for most of his post presidency life?
Well, I wouldn't call him a simpler guy, but I would say that he's somebody that wanted to connect with people all over the world, and he felt a responsibility. That's something I saw from the beginning. That President Carter had a responsibility he felt to Plains, to his family, but he also felt that he had a responsibility to the people of Georgia. He had been governor of Georgia, and through the years, he's done many activities for the state of Georgia. But he had been president of the United States. He had an obligation, he believed, to the American people. Nevertheless, his obligation to the people of the world, through the Carter Center in particular, uh, dominated his thoughts. His and we worked with the people that needed the most help in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America. We did work with Europeans and as well, and people in Australia and New Zealand, but that's not where we were helping. They were helping us help people in developing countries, and it's been a remarkable experience. He uh, was the sort of person that could have so many things on his mind at once and deal with them. This is hard for most people. You want to focus on one thing. But as governor and as president, he had learned that you need to focus hard on a topic, but then shift to something else. And he often said, well, this isn't easy for a president because the toughest issues that anyone can have are the ones that a president has to face. If they're easy, his subordinates will take care of it. So President Carter could move from one topic to another, give full concentration on those topics. And that was also something that was a skill that helped him as a campaigner in
Yeah.
politics. He could go from one city to another, learn what their problems were, and focus on them. Not give the same speech everywhere he went, but tailor it to the people he was addressing.
Yeah.
And the that was something that I've always found very remarkable about President Carter.
Yeah.
He cares about people, loyal, loyal to people. I think that was part of why he went home to Plains.
Hmm.
But he enjoys relaxing, but he really enjoys working as well.
Yeah.
And he has said to many young people, one thing that I did for him when we went left Plains and stopped writing to the one book, he had a relationship with Emory University, and he taught classes all through the university. So he would teach a course on government or on history or on religion, expert on that topic too. And he enjoyed it. And he would always say to students that helping other people is not a burden. You will enjoy it. You will get something out of it. And that's something I learned from him too.
Yeah.
It's not just an obligation. It's an opportunity to learn and to meet with people and to do things that
Yeah.
you can enjoy.
Yeah, and something he did a lot. You know, you talk about this obligation, this opportunity to get out not just to the people of Georgia or the people of this country, but all over the world. Can you put into words, I know it's such a monumental impact, but can you put into words the impact that he had on people that he met and the people that he helped across the world?
Well, he's an impressive figure. And when you work for him every day, you still remember that, but you get more used to it. But I always noted that when he met somebody else, when he went to a class or a lecture, these were people that would remember this the rest of their life because of his impressive personality, but also because this was a former president of the United States. And he understood that too. And when he would fly, uh, and he flew commercial, he didn't have reserved airplane, an airplane just for himself. He would be on the same flight as others. He knew that the people there were interested in him, and he would walk through the aisles, shaking hands and greeting people. That many people will remember that for the rest of their lives.
Hmm.
That President Carter came up to them and introduced himself and spoke to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there, I'm sure you have so many stories from over the years, but is there a particular story that stands out to you that is a favorite experience that you had with President Carter or a most memorable experience that you had?
That's a difficult question. I had so many memorable experiences with him, about him. Sometimes it wasn't uh, working closely with him. For instance, when I went to Norway for his receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, that was an extraordinary experience. But I wasn't spending all the time with him during that period. Uh, Working on books with him, he wrote 32 books, and he had written several before I even went to work for him. And I can't say that every one of the books afterwards I did that much. For instance, he wrote a children's book, and I didn't get to see that until after it was written. Very popular book. He wrote a book of poetry. There, I did get to see some of the poetry, but he had better advisors on writing poetry than me. I'm not an expert in writing poetry. President Carter liked to do and try new things. He wasn't, and this was true into his 90s. He enjoyed new things, trying something new, and it was fun for him. So he wrote all kinds of books. Many of them were somewhat autobiographical, and but he also did, as I say, children's books, a book of poetry, and some of the poetry was autobiographical. But the best book he wrote, the easiest for the audience to uh, understand, was one called "An Hour Before Daylight: Memories of a Rural Boyhood," and that is a beautifully written book about how he grew up in Plains. And one thing that I've noticed through the years is that you don't have to be a political supporter of President Carter to appreciate that book. Anybody that grew up in the rural South, and many people who didn't grow up in the rural South but want to learn about it, can identify with that
Hmm.
book.
Yeah.
And I recommend it highly. But there are lots of good books that he wrote, and I recommend them.
Yeah.
Good
Uh,
writer.
How often, I guess, did you talk to President Carter in the past few years, or when was the last time you talked to him, and what was that conversation like?
Well, the fact is that he retired in the fall, and he and Mrs. Carter both. And so I really have had very little direct contact with him for some months. Before that, before back in 18, not 18, 2019, the I had a close relationship with him, and we would talk frequently when he came to Atlanta, and even and on the telephone. We never did do Zoom meetings, but we would be very close. But once during the pandemic, he cut back considerably on his relationship with the Carter Center and with me. He wasn't writing anymore, and uh, and the last few months I haven't really talked to him.
Yeah.
The But I do remember the last time I went down to Plains. They had a great celebration of their 75th wedding anniversary. They being President and Mrs.
Mm-hmm.
Carter, and that was a great experience. That's the last time I saw him in person,
Okay.
and that was after the pandemic had started, but things looked pretty good. So they held at the Plains High School
Okay.
a big celebration for his 75th and Mrs. Carter's 75th anniversary.
Yeah.
Uh,
We hear so often, the people that we've talked to in the last week or so, about the legacy of President Carter, and maybe nobody knows better of that than you guys at the Carter Center. So what is the mission now for you all to carry on that legacy?
what we want to do, the three things that he left us, and you could express this in a lot of different ways, but uh, human rights, health, and building hope. That we would expand and work to create human rights, not create, that's the wrong word, because they're there. People have rights, but strengthen human rights throughout the world and address diseases and also build hope. And those are things that we are going to continue. We are going to continue working in many of the areas that he started us working, but we will stay open to new challenges. And we've had a strategic plan developed uh, to give us the opportunity to pick new projects. So projects will change, but the basic principles, the goals, they will stay the same.